get started. I am recording this, so if anybody didn't sign on right away, I'll make sure that I'll send out the recording to everybody. But let me introduce myself. My name is Pecola Abele, and I work for Women for a Healthy Environment. I am their Director of Healthy Learning. I oversee our Healthy Schools Pennsylvania program. And we're just committed to creating a safer, healthier learning environments for school environments. And having this webinar is going to be a crucial step for making sure that schools get the funding that they need. So there is an absolutely ridiculous amount of grant funding that is available for schools right now. And Women for a Healthy Environment, we are passionate about making sure that that grant funding gets to schools, NPA. We want to make sure school districts are getting that funding so that they can improve their facilities. So today we have with us Christie Yerger. She is the director of the Center for Community Enhancement at the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. And she is going to go into detail about the Public School Facility Improvement Grant Program and how you can apply. So without further ado, thank you, Christie, for being here.
Thank you, Pecola, for that introduction. I have a slideshow. I'll start sharing my screen here momentarily. I kind of have it broken out into 3 separate objectives. And so, Pecola, I don't know what you find would be easier. If we field questions, I can pause intermittently and just see if anything comes through. If you have a viewable chat or anything, I am also planning a Q&A time for after as well. So we've already kind of built that in. Just wanted to let folks know. All right, so let me get myself adjusted here. I will get my presentation. Pecola, do you have the ability to give me screen sharing permission? I'm seeing a sign that just says host disabled that. So if you're able to.
Yes, I apologize.
That's okay. I'm not used to doing these, so I'm not a Zoom or webinar expert.
Yes, I know there's so many buttons, but I think this will do it. Okay, now I think you're good to try.
Okay, let's see here. Oh, let me get rid of that. Okay, go away. Okay, find my PowerPoint here. Okay, can everybody see my screen that should have a cover slide for the Public School Facility Improvement Grant Program?
No, I don't see your screen. I just see you right now. So the share screen, it should be the green button. And the
yeah,
does it work?
Let me. Let's see here. Let me try this.
There we go.
Okay.
Now we can see.
Okay. Okay. So let me just bounce back here really quickly. Okay, that's much better. Let me minimize this. Okay, I'm working off just my one laptop today, so I apologize. Okay, so folks, I have been nominated to be the point person for what we have the Public School Facility Improvement Grant Program. My name is Christie Yerger. I've been with this department for about 18 years now. Currently in my role as the director of the Center for Community Enhancement, my responsibilities involve management of program staff. We have a lot of grant and loan funding available through the department, and so I have a few under my belt in my purview to oversee and implement, this being one of them. So today I wanted to touch base on a few objectives, hoping that we can kind of walk through and learn these together. So we're going to introduce who the Department of Community and Economic Development is, as well as the Commonwealth Financing Authority. Both of those entities are identified in the program guidelines. We're going to review the Public School Facility Improvement Grant Program guidelines, and we'll also provide electronic single application tips. So that third part is actually how you would access the application system. So to begin, as I mentioned, I work for the Department of Community and Economic Development, and I'm tasked with implementing this school facility improvement program. The Department of Community and Economic Development's mission is to encourage the shared prosperity of all Pennsylvanians by supporting good stewardship and sustainable development initiatives across our Commonwealth. With a keen eye toward diversity and inclusiveness, we act as advisors and advocates, providing strategic technical assistance, training, and financial resources to help our communities and industries flourish. So one thing I think that you all as an audience coming from education, it's pretty obvious that we don't have anything identified in education. And so I will say to you, as we kind of set out on this learning adventure together, it will be both sides going through a learning process. So I can say that even though we aren't professionals in the field of education, we do have a lot of experience managing programs, funding programs that help support various things throughout the Commonwealth, including housing, blight, environmental remediation, infrastructure projects, parks and recreation, flood mitigation, site development, community and economic development, and multimodal transportation, just to name a few. So the Commonwealth Financing Authority is the part of the program guidelines that is very important to also understand. The CFA was established in 2004 as an independent agency of DCD to administer PA's economic stimulus packages. And the CFA holds fiduciary responsibility over some funding programs and investments in PA's economic growth. The CFA consists of 7 board members, 4 legislative appointees, and the secretaries of DCED, the Office of Budget, and the Department of Banking and Securities. So project approval requires 5 affirmative votes, 4 of which must come from legislative appointees. And if, for those of you who have already had time to refer to our program guidelines, that's great. You already kind of have a head start into some of this familiarity. I will also be using these acronyms, DCED and CFA, throughout the presentation. But if you haven't, it is definitely worth noting who the 2 entities are and how this program is going to be implemented all the way from application submission to then program awards. So we'll start right off with the statement of purpose for this particular program. And this really does shed some light on what the actual intent of the program is. I'm sure coming from your field, as Pecola mentioned, there are all kinds of opportunities for funding in the education world. And this particular stream of funding was created to provide grants to public school districts and area career and technical schools for eligible facility improvement projects. This program was established under a certain law. I have all the details right there, and is administered by the DCD under the direction of the CFA. So the reason I was very particular in referencing this law, as well as it is identified in our guidelines, is because you'll see that most of the guidelines as they are written are very much taken directly from this Act 34 language. So as we head into walking through the rest of these guidelines, I just wanted to make sure folks were aware of that. There are some components of the guidelines that were more additional, if you will, in terms of how we typically practice implementing projects and programs here under the CFA. So I will say this is the very first time we are implementing this program, and currently we have $100 million to award. So we'll kind of start right off from the very beginning. For those of you who might have reference to your guidelines, I am going to kind of go right in order here. Eligible applicants. This was identified as a school district or area career and technical school. So I understand in the education world, there may be a broader definition of who is an educational entity. So for purposes of this particular program, Act 34 defines eligible applicants as a school entity, which is then further defined as a school district or area career and technical school only. So there has been some confusion. We've had these guidelines posted for about a month and a half now. And some of the questions I have been fielding are, would IUs and charter schools be eligible to apply? And unfortunately, the answer is no, per the Act 34, which has these definitions shared there. So we are only focused on school districts or the area career and technical schools themselves. So next we have quite a laundry list of eligible improvement projects. This has been identified, again, straight from Act 34. The law mandates that we focus the program to these types of projects. And I just want to bring to your attention, I don't necessarily want to read them all, but I think one of the points I would like to make is that, we are looking to improve facilities. So this doesn't necessarily include new construction for new schools or new expansion. We're really focused on the existing footprint and improving what exists. The other thing I would point out, demolition is identified here, and it really doesn't have a very clear definition as to like what that means. And so what we want to put forward here in this program is, this isn't demolition just for the sake of demolition. This would be selective demolition that might be needed as folks are undertaking their facility improvements. So, for example, if an area of a school maybe was damaged from a fire or had water damage, and upon further inspection, it's really decided that, hey, a basic rehab may not necessarily do the job here. To do it right, we may need to demolish a wing and rebuild, or demolish completely a certain area of the school in order to get it back up to productive reuse. So just want to clarify that. The other item here, I think that is a big topic and also may cause some confusion. Emergencies is also identified as an eligible improvement project. And you might be thinking, well, what constitutes an emergency? How do I know if my project that I'm submitting will qualify as an emergency? But I do have that information here forthcoming in some upcoming slides. And lastly, I do realize the very vague and undefined last bullet point that identifies other projects approved by the CFA. So I will mention first that upon discussion, when we learned that this program funding was coming our way and we were responsible for developing the guidelines, again, taking all cues directly from the law, one of this for the language you see here was actually included in the law. So we had to include it in our guidelines. And I will say we did have those kinds of discussions to see if there were any thoughts given to projects above and beyond what's already listed here. And there were no comments there to add. They felt that the eligible improvement projects listed in the law certainly summed up what they were after and hoping to attempt to help their schools across the Commonwealth with these improvement projects. So really right now, one of the other questions I've been getting is, well, what's another project that you would recommend we apply for? And unfortunately, there's not really a defined piece right now. So we are still focused on those other bullet points that you see here. So doing a little bit of a deeper dive into emergency projects. This I just want to bring to people's attention because we do, again, by law, have that defined. What is an emergency? So per Act 34, an emergency is a deficiency in a school building that prohibits the school building or a portion of the building from being occupied. So that's very important to understand that word occupied. And eligible emergency improvement projects will be considered for emergencies occurring as of as of July 1st, 2023, or after, heading into this application round. So this is a little bit of a learning curve, I will admit, on our end of things too, implementing and managing programs housed under the Commonwealth Financing Authority. We have not really ever had to manage emergency type projects or projects that may move forward and start incurring costs before we actually take the project proposal to the CFA for review. And frankly, before, our team of analysts would have any review or communication with that particular applicant. So this is a little bit of a new route for us as well. But I think it's very important to just understand what constitutes an emergency. And we'll get in a little bit later as to, if you do have an emergency project, how do I communicate that through the application? So if you've thought about the types of projects that are maybe of higher priority to your schools, again, going back to those lists of eligible improvement type projects, roof and repair and renovation and so forth, what kinds of costs can you expect to be supported with this grant? So when we talk about the actual costs that it's going to take to implement these eligible improvement projects, we're talking about construction and renovation activities, purchase and installation of equipment. We can do remediation work as it is associated perhaps with asbestos or lead. We also, again, have that demolition, and here I was sure to add, these are demolition of structures directly related to the eligible facility improvement project. So again, we're not focusing on demolition of schools or any other part of school-owned buildings that may be vacant and, potentially you just want to avoid them becoming blighted. Or like I said, again, demolishing a school for making room to construct a new school. So those types of activities are not the intent of the program. But again, if it's directly related to an eligible facility improvement project, we definitely can consider this as part of our costs. We can also direct some of these dollars to environmental site assessments and environmental studies if they are going to help you move forward with your facility improvement project. And some of the additional components that the CFA programs typically allow for are some very strategically defined extraneous costs. We do understand that to effectuate a project in a responsible manner, sometimes you're going to have an engineer or a professional on hand to manage the design, maybe provide inspection work throughout the life of that project. So we do allow some of those funds under the grant, that opportunity to, I would say, allocate up to 10% of your grant request of that grant amount towards these soft costs that would constitute engineering and design related to that project. If you have anything in excess here in the design and engineering world, we can certainly count that into the project scope. Anything in excess of that 10%, though, would just fall into the match column that would be the responsibility of the applicant to cover. We also have project contingencies associated with construction costs. Sometimes when we get estimates in that support the project proposal, at times, depending on who that professional is doing the quote, and I completely understand the need to think about where costs may be in the future. Building in a cushion, if you will, for unforeseen and unexpected costs is really what we're trying to assist with here. However, we do only find ourselves with so much money to go around. Virtually all of our programs, we have well in excess ask of what we actually have to award. So we try to limit inflated cost estimates. So strategically all across the board with the programs under the CFA, we've sort of come to an agreement that 5% is a somewhat reasonable allowance for those eligible construction costs. And then we will not allow any other contingencies as part of those project budgets. Lastly, we have administrative costs. This is a cost to administer that program grant should you be awarded. So we're taking into consideration, you know, if awarded, you're going to go through a competitive procurement process. You may have some legal costs, and it does cost some money to get that that paperwork processed and get your project advertised, as well as setting aside some key staff who may be tasked with overseeing that grant. So again, we're not necessarily talking about overall project administration, but we are talking about the time and attention that is needed for a person who is employed by our grantee to really make sure that the requirements of the grant are being met. So that request can just be built into your budget. You don't necessarily, at the time of application, need to provide a cost estimate as such. But if you do wish to work that into your proposal, you're more than welcome to add a number that does not exceed 2% of the program grant amount. So those in general are just some of the costs that we're going to be considering as eligible moving forward. And I'll just pause here briefly, Pecola. I don't know if there are any pertinent questions that you may have seen come up that maybe we should address sooner than later.
See, does anybody have any questions you would like to ask right now? I did have a question while they're thinking. So
Sure.
I'm wondering about the emergency projects. You said that they could date back to 7/1/23. So is that only for emergency projects?
That is currently only for emergency projects. So we had to identify a specific date for now. And when we get into a few slides here in future, we will start talking about some of those ineligible costs. And we do reference all other projects that would fall into the non-emergency category. We do have specific guidance for when those costs can begin being incurred to maintain eligibility. So right now that date only relates to those emergency projects. And I will say, as this is our first implementation of this program, this is the first time, this first tranche of money coming at us, we felt that was a fair and reasonable starting point. And moving forward, should we get any additional funding in the future, that is something we may reconsider. You know, if we get funding in 5 years from now, I don't know that that date would always make sense, but for purposes of this funding round, that is the date we have set for those emergency projects only.
Okay, and thank you for answering that. That makes sense. Erica had a question. She says, does the 5% administrative cost include indirect costs?
That depends on what indirect costs are. So if it's something that falls outside of this, these identification pieces, public advertisements, legal costs. Again, we're talking about grantee staff to meet the grant requirements. What we're looking at there, the time that a staff person may put into managing this particular grant contract would be things like, you know, taking the time to make sure you read your grant contract for funding, making sure you understand all of those requirements that will be included there. Anytime that you may have to reach out to me or other program staff with any kind of questions or discussion, you can kind of log that time. And then lastly, one of the most popular components of that is the management of the paperwork, right? This is going to be processed as a reimbursement grant. So it will be someone's responsibility to complete a payment request form, collect all of that reimbursement paperwork that would have to come over to my program office in order to authorize a disbursement for the reimbursement. So those are the types of things that are eligible. If there are things that people have questions on outside of that, I would say try to be as specific as possible in your application to make that ask. You could also, I'll have my contact information for sure here at the end, could be something you want to reach out to me ahead of time and help me understand like what indirect costs you have in mind, because it's a very nebulous, ambiguous word, and it could mean a lot of different things to different people. So we just want to make sure we get you headed in the right direction.
Thank you. And we do have one more question.
Okay.
Would environmental site assessments and environmental studies include a feasibility study to include a building that will be vacated in the future due to new construction?
I do not believe at this time that is the intent of the program. Yep. So we are looking at upgrading those facilities so that we can continue to have a healthy and safe learning environment for both students and staff.
Thank you. So I guess one other question that I would have before we move on, since we're still on eligible costs, and I know you mentioned lead, asbestos. I was wondering, would mold and water damage also be included?
Yes, that's a great question. So we are looking to remedy any kind of issues that, we want to prevent those ongoing issues as well. And I certainly would consider those as part of the remediation component.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. We do not have any other questions at this time.
Okay, perfect. I thought that was a nice kind of breaking point. I know it will seem like a lot of information, but we'll get through this. So, okay. So, getting into then the ineligible costs, this is pretty standard and typical of our other CFA programs. And again, I say this knowing that you as an audience are probably not used to working through DCD and or the CFA. I did actually refer back to several programs that we operate, and public schools and school districts just tend not to be those eligible applicant components. So I just thought it was relevant to remind folks who are going through this for the first time that some of these costs will just need to be removed completely from the budget. We do realize that, sometimes these things exist, but the CFA would prefer to direct our funding opportunities towards the actual projects. And a couple of things I will point out here, Pecola, you had requested, you had a question about the emergency projects. The fourth bullet point down does identify costs incurred prior to the approval of grant funds. I will say then later on, we will identify that this piece does not apply then to emergency projects. But if you are a non-emergency project, you would follow this guidance. Costs incurred means that you have started receiving bills and being responsible for payment to any of the vendors participating in the project itself, whether that's soft costs or the hard costs like that labor, purchasing equipment, getting equipment installed, and things of that nature. So we just want to make sure that the project doesn't commence prior to the approval of those grant funds. And we can even take it a step back here. Starting a project, and I believe I may even have this on a slide upcoming, but I guess it doesn't hurt to mention it a couple of times because it is an important piece. We really are advising that folks not sign any contracts with the vendors that are going to be doing the project or issuing notices to proceed. So it is also more about kind of pausing, seeing where the award consideration goes. And those costs incurred prior to the approval of grant funds are definitely going to be ineligible. And so while they may have been used to support those next steps, the next steps coming that you may include in that proposal, we just want to make sure we don't have those identified in the project budget. Administrative buildings and sports facilities. We did want to identify these specifically. The guidance here is really, I realize the makeup of the schools and the school layouts could vary from district to district. So the guidance here would be the program isn't here to necessarily focus solely on administrative buildings. if you happen to have your admin staff rolled up into the building where you do have students coming and learning there, that's one thing, but we didn't want to focus solely on admin buildings. And the other component too, sports facilities, thinking of, like football stadiums, track and field, softball, baseball, soccer fields, tennis courts, those kinds of improvements for things that are outside that main facility, we're kind of staying away from here. Again, this is the first foray into this program. And so I think we're going to use this as a learning experience for sure. Those of you who may not be used to working with TCD or CFA, we certainly pride ourselves on customer service. And it's always a learning curve for us the first time we unroll a program and take it through from that application window all the way through awards and contracting. We learn a lot too. And if this program is to grow or evolve or it comes back around again, I will say I've already had some feedback regarding the sports facilities piece. So I can't guarantee that there would be any upcoming change should there be other injections of funding here in the future. But it is something that we have been dealing with. So for our purposes now and the specific rollout of this year's funding, the focus would not be on those sports facilities. Okay. So the next piece that I think was tripping people up a bit was understanding how many applications can come forth and what do they have to look like? How should they be structured? So first and foremost, I will say you can apply and put forth as many applications as you wish. There's really no limit to the quantity of applications. Okay. That being said, and I do have this noted moving forward, there is $100 application fee associated with the submission. So, I mean, that may be one thing that you're going to take into consideration that will help you make those decisions. But for purposes of our structuring of these applications, you could do it one of two ways. So a single building and multi-building application have different requirements. So a school entity can submit an application that is for one single school building, which may include one or more of the eligible improvement project categories from Section 2B of the guidelines. So if you remember that laundry list of roof repair and replacement, window repair and replacement, demolition, HVAC, plumbing, if you have multiple things from that list and one school kind of needs like just that huge overhaul, that's one application and you can only include one building or project site there. If you have two or more school buildings that you are interested in funding, because let's say multiple buildings in your district are just all due for a roofing update. So if you're only doing roofing, you could submit an application that includes multiple building sites, and all of those sites, the eligible improvement project proposed would be for roof replacement. So I'll say that one more time. If you have buildings needing multiple things from those eligible improvement projects to be completed, you're going to submit multiple applications. You can only have one school building under a project proposal if you're doing more than one of those eligible improvement projects. And if you're only selecting one eligible improvement project and it does include multiple buildings, they can all fit into one application proposal. So I think I got that straight. I just want to make sure this might be another good stopping point, Pecola, if folks have any further questions here.
Okay. Did anybody have any questions in the building about in the room about the two building applications? I'll give you guys a minute to type if you did. So Erica did have a follow-up about the indirect cost from before. specifically about, she said that indirect costs are general business and administrative expenses like utilities, office, rent, and supplies. So I think that's what
Yeah, that stuff would have to remain off the project proposal in terms of the actual numbers in the budget. And we do realize, I think we run into that too. Other projects from other programs, sometimes they have to carry insurance, or for some reason or other costs have increased because of this project. Unfortunately, we have to leave those kinds of things out. Good question, though. I'm glad I could clarify.
Great. I don't see any questions. Oh, wait, someone's typed something. Oh, Erica said thank you. Okay, so I do
Sure.
not see any other questions yet, right now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is again just the structure of your project proposal, whether or not you have multiple buildings under consideration and or multiple eligible types of multiple eligible improvement projects. So just something to keep in mind. This is some guidance on how you're going to structure that proposal. So the second part of the requirements, as you're putting forth your project proposal or application submission, is to really understand this is a program that does require matching funds. And so a grant request will not exceed 75% of the total eligible project costs, which means the responsibility of the other 25% comes from our applicant. Matching funds are any of those funds in addition to the grant request necessary to complete the proposed project, and they must be secured at the time of application submission. So when we get further along here to those additional addenda components, we do collect, we'll speak more to those commitment letters and things of that nature that can help justify and provide evidence of your secured match. I will say that it's important to note that the match requirement may be waived or reduced for a school district that is either in financial watch or financial recovery status. We are working with the Pennsylvania Department of Education to just make sure that as we move our reviews forward, we'll have the most current information. I understand that they do kind of manage a web page, if you will, that does publish this information. So that is where we will be getting our guidance there. And lastly, no matching funds will be required for a project that is determined by the CFA to be an emergency. Again, so there's some special consideration again for those emergency projects to keep in mind. I'll move on to the next couple of pages here. Or points I would like to talk about are just some additional program requirements. If you look on pages 3 and 4 of our program guidelines, we list that in full detail, and it really is just to give folks a heads up so that if you are approved, you're not really caught off guard by the actual contractual language that will identify these projects later on. So we felt it important to communicate these. People can keep these in mind as they're moving forward with their application proposals. But the two that I really want to call out specifically, because often they are some of the ones that are maybe the bigger hurdles to get over to maintain eligibility. We will have bidding requirements. And so typically applicants will be expected to follow all federal, state, and local laws and regulations dealing with bidding and procurement. So I think most of this audience is probably already familiar with what your school districts require of you. And so just know that moving forward, if you are approved, some sort of competitive procurement process will be required. And the second biggie here is the Pennsylvania Prevailing Wage Act. So all or a portion of that construction work associated with the improvement project may be subject to the Pennsylvania Prevailing Wage Act. This is determined by the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry. And it is the responsibility of our applicant and our funding recipient to ensure that Wage Act is followed if applicable. So one of my points to you is I'm sure you're not unfamiliar with PA prevailing wage. But what we want to make sure is that you have a firm understanding of the activities you want to undertake, will they trigger prevailing wage? Do they, what is that determination? And so for those of you who may not be sure, I would just advise you reach out to the Department of Labor and Industry now and just kind of give them an update and a summary of your project to better understand if those wage rates will apply. That way there are no surprises later on. Trust me, that would be a big hurdle to try to overcome later on. So if we could be proactive about that, that is usually beneficial for everybody involved. Okay, so getting into some more of the actual application and funding points, what you can expect. Some of the language here, I just want to point out, grants are available for eligible improvement projects with a total project cost of $500,000 or more. The only time that may be waived is if the project involves the purchase of automated external defibrillators. I did put in bold here, this is a total project cost, not the grant ask. So when you're looking at the total number of your project, it has to equal $500,000. That includes that grant and the match component. Grant awards will not exceed $5 million. And no school entity, as well as these area career and technical schools, we have some language in there that discusses awards would not exceed 20% of the funds allocated by the CFA under the program. So some of that is, you won't necessarily know that upfront. It depends on what we get in the door, but take into consideration that the current funding available to award is $100 million. Okay. So another important component is looking at this project activity period. And we had kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, this special consideration for these emergency projects. We kind of already identified that, but if you're a non-emergency project, it's really important to understand what that word commence means in our guidelines. And again, the improvement projects that begin prior to approval may result in the project being ineligible for funding consideration. So we're advising that folks don't sign vendor contracts and you don't issue notices to proceed. So this is more about more than just, shovel in the ground type, commencing of a project. So definitely hold off on those. And again, emergency projects, keep that July 1, 2023 date in mind. Okay. And finally, I just wanted to jump into some of these application evaluation criteria. So we are mandated to incorporate a rubric that gives a competitive evaluation to these projects. I will say at this time, we don't have that fully formed. So what I would say in this slide is to just be aware, it's no secret that we're going to look at these things. And by the way, this is not listed in any particular order. So when you look at school entity wealth, building conditions, including the age of the buildings, emergencies, health, safety, and security, as you're crafting your application, if you feel any or all of your project really hits on these things, feel free to share that, really tell your story, and make sure that that information is communicated over to us clearly. But like I said, at this time, we do have to get a funding rubric passed by the CFA. It has not come to fruition yet, so there's really no other guidance I can give here. I have just been advising folks when they call me to just be mindful of this component, and just to really know those bulleted points are not really listed in any particular order. So we don't know where some of that weight will come from and to what particular components yet. But just be mindful that these are going to be some things that we're looking at in the application review. So in terms of the application supplemental items, this is what we call the exhibits or addenda that really get uploaded to the main body of our application. And this is really a set of information, a set of documents that we collect that's going to be specific to this particular program. We feel that asking for this information will help us review in full, and everybody is sort of held to the same standards here. So when you get to Exhibit 1, this is the project description. Now, on this slide, I didn't really write out items A through J, but if you refer to the guidelines in full, you can see them clearly outlined. If you feel that nothing applies, you'll have to write NA, but I would encourage you really look through that and thoughtfully present us your story. Keep in mind that you're going to be having your applications reviewed by folks who may not be familiar with your community, let alone your school. So it'll be really important to kind of be mindful of the answers you're putting in here and really letting us know the situation you're in and why you're asking for the funding. Additionally to this Exhibit 1, when you're in the application, you'll note a little area. It's kind of an extra box. If you feel that you have additional information that you want to put forth that we don't really ask for, we've made an area to upload that. This could include pictures or photographs, other documents that you feel will help your proposal. Maybe you have some data that include study results or tests. That's the place to add it if you feel that it could if you feel that it could really benefit where you've already completed your narrative and just act as some supplemental information there. The next documentation we have requested is some sort of school building assessment. So again, I realize there could be a range here of what this document actually looks like. It may be 2 pages, it may be 20 pages. You may have hired a professional to do this. You may have just tasked some of your staff to go through some of the prioritization. We're really just looking for some information that demonstrates the methodology used for determining project priority. You know, how are you and your school board and your district like making these decisions when it comes to implementing a project? You know, is there something in place that you can offer and share with us that kind of talks about this conversation piece happening? So again, a lot of this assessment piece we're looking at, you know, do you take other things into consideration and evaluate, you know, maybe the age and the condition of the facility or the facilities, if it's multiple buildings. But we're really just looking for any background information as to, you know, kind of like why this project, why now type thing. And we do realize, again, like I said, it could be formal, maybe it's a little less formal, but anything you got, we're just asking you put that over for us to review. Okay, the next 2 slides, I will say, I've been fielding a lot of phone calls. I do realize this has caused some confusion, so I will provide some clarity here. So the law mandates that at the time of application, we collect bids or estimates. And so first of all, I think people saw the word bid, and that's what's first listed in that sentence in the law. And then they kind of forgot to read the rest of the sentence or didn't pay quite enough attention. And people became panicked because they were looking at our application window and concerned that, you know, we can't take this through a full bid process by May 31st. Like, what do we do? So kind of like after taking a deep breath, you know, estimates will also suffice. So I just want to make sure folks aren't panicked about that bid process. But really what we're talking about here, I do realize the confusion. We call it bid tabulation. It's also a tabulation of the estimates. It's really a tabulation of any numbers that came over to you that speak to potential project costs. So in this particular exhibit, we are not wanting to see those copies if you have these written copies of estimates or bids in full, we're looking for you to create a spreadsheet or a Word document that lists the 3 vendors, the date that they provided their estimate, and the amount that they're quoting you. So again, that is really just the listing part that's coming through to us. So while we call it bid tabulations, we do realize and recognize this may also just be a listing of estimates received for purposes of the application. In the next exhibit, number 4, this is where we're asking for the cost estimate, or again, the bid. Again, learning curve here. Now that we're actually practicing and putting it into process, you know, we also are thinking, oh, here's already some items to clarify if this comes around again. So the cost estimate or that bid that you are choosing because maybe this is the one that you feel most realistically aligns with you know the number and maybe what a professional is really telling you the project is going to cost. You're going to pick that one, upload that in full. So again, we're looking for an estimate or a bid that has some detail to it, has some meat to it. You know, we can fully see, you know, identified tasks that are going to be involved, what it's going to take to actually do that project. We ask that they be dated within a year of application submission. I mean, I think it's fair to say we all know costs have not really been going down. We're hearing that feedback from other applicant pools and other customers that we work with. So I think to everybody's benefit, especially yours, try to get as current as you can, you know, with those numbers. And then lastly, we're uploading, you know, this is what we're doing. We're uploading that document in full. And this is where you're really going to base your project budget in the electronic single application. You're literally going to have a budget with multiple columns to create. You know, you'll have your grant column, you're going to add your matching sources, and you're going to kind of identify those types of project costs. That budget in ESA should be reflective of this Exhibit 4 number. So this is the one you're giving us a full copy of. Please do not send in like 3 copies and multiple estimates. I think it will only cause confusion for our staff. This is also new to us. Typically, we would require just the one set of numbers. And so I think this between exhibits 3 and 4, this was the clearest way that we felt we could still meet the requirements of the law, but also hopefully reduce confusion, not only on our end internally working for a review, but also on your end as you're kind of collecting all of this paperwork. And kind of revisiting the match requirement, if you recall, projects that have this applicable match is responsible for 25% of that total project cost, or at least 25%. And I will say what we're looking for here is commitment letters. This would be all other project funding sources. So some of you might have multiple other sources contributing to the project. Some of you may only have one, and that's okay. The funding commitments should be signed and dated. You want to indicate the amount of funds. And lastly, I do want to clarify the source of this funding doesn't necessarily really matter so long as it's cash match. So if you have another grant commitment to this project, great. Send us that commitment letter, that award letter, that approval letter. That'll help suffice there. If you are supplying like your own equity or your own cash, maybe you have bond financing, maybe you have a line of credit, maybe you just have actually in your accounting set aside funds and have an account specifically for these types of projects. Great, put it on a letter, write that in and submit that and upload that. And lastly, when it comes to loans or any consideration where you may be thinking you might need to take out additional financing, do not take out the financing yet. That's not what we're asking. We're not asking for folks to go out and officially take on a new loan at this time. So for purposes of the application, we just would like to know that those conversations maybe have at least started. So those term sheets that you might be able to acquire from those lending institutions should reflect the term, the rate, collateral conditions, and also must be signed and dated. So again, so long as it's cash match, we don't have any restrictions, so long as it's at least 25%. The one thing I will say we're not looking to make eligible, sometimes folks want to try to work in-kind donated goods and services. Unfortunately, those do not necessarily mix well with our programs. So again, we're looking for that actual cash match. This one is pretty, I think, short and sweet. There's a resolution that is required to be passed in order to apply to the program. I did put a sample both in the hard copy of the guidelines if you're able to access the guidelines themselves. Also, when you get into the electronic single application, there is like a downloadable version there as well. So from either source, you might be able to just snag a copy and reutilize that. No sense in reinventing the wheel. But it's really key that that resolution hits all of the things. When you look at it, there are some blanks there. We definitely want you to fill those all in. And like I said, I would just refer to those drafts and those samples out there. If you have your own language that you're used to using, that's great. We just ask that you make sure you incorporate all of these details. If those things can be added, that's totally fine. And lastly, the final exhibit is for emergency projects. So if you do not have an emergency project, it is not going to be required to fill out. But if you do have an emergency project, please be aware we are asking for some additional information to help convey that emergency to us. And so I won't read this here, but we are asking for a letter to come over. We felt that was the most clear way the applicants can communicate to us that their intent is, yes, I am applying for an emergency project, and here is why. Here is why we think we meet the definition of emergency. And we just ask that you provide any of those supporting documents to help talk about that experience and that situation. So I will do another pause here before we get into the final components of the application tips and tricks. So I'll pause and see if we had any other questions come over.
Yes, we had a question from Mike. He had a question about projects that are eligible. He said, let's say an HVAC project would roughly cost 300,000 and a roofing project at 200,000. Would this qualify, or would each project have to be a minimum of 500,000?
Your project proposal, if you're including both of those items, that would meet the $500,000 minimum total project cost.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I'll let some other people take some time to type some questions while they do that. I do have a question about the matching funds.
Okay.
So you mentioned that the matching funds should not be in kind, and they could come from anywhere. So does that include other like state funding as well, like a grant?
Yes, that's a great question. So on the flip side of that, what I should also say is while this program doesn't have any restrictions on the source, if you are looking at crafting a proposal that does have other multiple sources, even federal dollars, it probably doesn't hurt to go back and revisit those other funding guidelines. Because what we hate for you to go through is thinking you have the green light to move forward here and you're good, and then finding out later, oh, sorry, like our funding can't be used to maybe match or leverage, the sources that you already have in hand. So there's two sides to that. We're flexible, but that doesn't always mean that other program sources are flexible. So I do usually try to remind folks, maybe go back and take a look at what those guidelines and requirements are. Just make sure that if you throw this in the mix, you're not I'd hate for you to lose out or make a mistake and end up losing the other funding too. So just be mindful.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So I have another question regarding the match as well. So, say Women for a Healthy Environment wanted to partner with one of these school districts, would we be able to, say if they had a project to, let's go off of Mike's example. He was doing the roofs and I don't remember what he said. Yeah, roofs. So say that we wanted to get the assessment done to see, like, I don't know, maybe there's water coming in or there's mold and we're like applying for, we're gonna pay for their testing. Does that count towards the match if we pay for the testing or anything that they would be doing within their project?
Yeah, that's a great question because I'm also picking up on specific language you were using to describe that. So here's what I would say. Technically, if your group was going to award a grant, I'm not sure how you guys transfer money when you support a project. But I wouldn't say that your group paying for that could be eligible match. So when we're looking at these costs incurred, we're looking once these projects get approved that those costs are incurred by our grantee. So one of the things to keep in mind is who's actually getting the bill, who's footing the bill, whose name's going to be on that bill. If you give them money to say, hey, I'm going to support you, go ahead and move forward with this, that's one thing. But if you were to actually move forward and undertake the project, that's a different thing. And you're now a different entity incurring costs for the benefit there. So I just want to be clear, when we talk about the match, and even the grant contract will identify this. We're expecting that the name of our grantee, whoever we identify that is formally and legally, that's the group that we would expect to see incur costs, whether it's the costs that they're requesting we reimburse under the grant or costs that they're proposing as match. So does that clear that up for you all?
Yes, thank you. Let's see if there's any other questions.
And one other addition to that, I would say, is noting the time period of when those costs actually are incurred. So again, we're even looking at the match to not begin prior to project approval date. So that's the other important piece. I'm not sure if I really clarified or honed in on that prior, but I do just want to make a point to do so now.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So for exhibit 3, you did mention that they needed, so that's where they would put in where they need their 3 bids at that point and their 3 estimates. And then
Mhm.
exhibit 4 is where they pick their.
They pick one. Yep. They pick one, upload it in full. And that's what my office will use to actually review and vet in full. And the other one is really just a list.
Okay. All
Yep.
right. Well, those are all of my questions, and we don't have any in the chat right now.
Okay, so I'll just move on and kind of in closing of this particular section of the presentation, just some key dates to know and other program information. Again, just especially taking into consideration, we're working with a new applicant pool. So our application window for this year, the application is currently open. It opened on March 1st. Don't feel like you were late to the game. There's still plenty of time. We have until May 31st, 2024, and I believe it's legitimately like 11:59 p.m. I, however, would caution against waiting until the very last minute. We have a great customer service team, and I always advise folks, if you're waiting until that 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock range to officially hit the submit button, sometimes technical challenges do happen. So I would say the sooner you can get it off your plate, the better. There's no benefit to applying early. One of the other questions I have been getting is if I apply now, is this approved on a rolling basis? It is not on a rolling basis. So as of May 31st, once we see and evaluate everything that comes in the door, we will distribute and assign application reviews to my analysts, and they will review them all at once. So there's no benefit in terms of if I get in sooner than May 31st, do I have a better chance of getting funding? So it's not really first come, first served. I do anticipate award announcements sometime in the fall of 2024. Again, just wanting to let folks know as you're figuring out what projects to put forth, not only is it good to know what your project expectation is in terms of a timeline, but understand our review timeline. So I've already had some folks call and they've already gone through a bid process, and I think they're legitimately like ready to start construction in this school, or I should say in this school break season this summer. Unfortunately, if that's what your project was heading towards, I mean, currently I would say the path. Unfortunately, it just doesn't fit as a project for this particular funding round. The timing just doesn't work because again, we can't have projects commencing. So just keep that in mind. We're looking at fall 2024. All of those applications that are eligible will take up through a single block vote to our Commonwealth Financing Authority meeting. I believe they have September 17th scheduled right now. The other part of that is me just kind of knowing definitively on June 1st when I get into work, you know, what was the volume of applications we received. And then lastly, just again, a reminder, there is a $100 fee per application submitted in ESA. So even if you are a district that has 2 or 3 applications, you know, if you're doing 2 applications, that's $200. If you're doing 3, that's $300. So just be mindful there. It's not per applicant, it is per application that you're actually submitting to us through the door. And those are just some key things I just want folks to be mindful of before we head into kind of talking about what is the electronic single application, how do you access it, what can you expect once you're in there, and just kind of providing some tips and guidance as you maneuver your way through that process. So I'm not sure if our audience here is necessarily familiar with the electronic single application. And here's another acronym for you. We call it ESA for short here in my office. It's an application for assistance that allows the applicant to apply for various programs using one form while capturing specific program information needed to evaluate the project for possible funding. So it's almost meant at its front facing to be like a one size fits all. And then if you recall, we walked through all of that supplemental information. That supplemental information, those exhibits, that's unique to this particular program. But as you start chipping away at the ESA, you'll find that it's collecting very basic information that I think most other programs would want to have on file as well. And so that's where you're going to basically create applicant profile. You know, what is the name of the entity applying, your address. You'll want to have your FEIN handy. We do ask for that. You know, think about who you would want to add as a contact. We do like to collect at least one point of contact in that profile page so that we have a phone number and an email address of someone that we can reach out to and kind of talk through if we have any questions or are missing any information. That's very important to make sure that that is current and that that person truly does know what their role is, so that if they do field any questions from us, they can assist relatively timely. I will say, for those of you who aren't familiar with DCED, we do pride ourselves on our customer service. This is a group of analysts and program managers like myself who will do our best to get applications to be complete, make sure they're eligible. And if it doesn't appear so upon our initial review in that submission, you know, we will reach out and have a conversation. We'll help you collect any outstanding pieces that we feel will help move the project forward, the project application forward. We're here to serve you and helping you put a project application in the best light possible moving forward, so that when it gets on that CFA agenda, if we should be asked any questions, sometimes it happens. We want to make sure that we have the information readily available and we can confidently speak to your project proposal. So that being said, we'll kind of jump in here. And our program page, there's a couple different ways you can access the actual application here. It is all online, so it's electronic. Our whole process from submitting the application, application review, and then if approved, we have our grant contracts also circulated electronically. So we have gotten rid of all the hard copy paper and are really embracing the digital world here. So to begin, you can access our, I don't know if you see my mouse here. So at this website, you can see we have a programs and funding menu, and there's a single application note right here of menu selection. You're going to use what's called a Keystone login. And so if you're used to working through other state agencies, you may have had to create this at some point in time, but if not, and you're brand new, no worries. You can create a new login credential, a typical username and password. And this will safely and securely allow you to access any applications that you may be interested in submitting through this program. And I will just move forth because there's another maybe simplified way. I just thought I would show both depending on what information you have access to as you're working through this. But if you are on our program webpage, there is an apply button literally right through our program page that takes you directly to that application. And so once you're in there, I didn't have a test one to open and kind of show today, but what I'm going to mention is you may be prompted to create some user settings. And not only will that help determine your eligibility for other programs, that may not necessarily be the priority to think about right now, but especially if you're going to be one of those applicants who has multiple project applications that are going to come through under this program, it will definitely help so you don't have to continually write out your name as an applicant, who is your applicant contact, your address, your FEIN. So there are some user settings that you can incorporate and save. And this way, if you're submitting multiple applications, there are some shortcuts, if you will. You won't have to duplicate entering in that information. A lot of questions I do get still are, do you have any blank applications that I can look at prior to applying? And unfortunately, that is no longer the case now that we don't have hard copy applications that you can just get to a web. There was a point in time where you could get to our website and click and print a blank application, but that is no longer the case. If you get in there and select a program, once you identify that program, you will be able to just, okay, before I even start filling this out electronically, maybe you just want to print it out and share it with, some people on your team. And then one of the other things I find that's helpful, I think you'll be going through about 6 pages of the application. There will be some information that may not seem completely applicable, and that is okay. So long as you fill out the required fields, those are the fields with a red diamond. Those are the fields that must be satisfied in order to actually click the submit button at the end of the day. So again, if you're working through and you are looking at a question or a field that does not have a red diamond, I wouldn't overthink it. I wouldn't stress out about it. You could just move on. It will not keep you from submitting the application. If you do feel like it could be applicable and you'd like to share that information, please fill it out. No harm, no foul. But again, if it's not required, I tend to tell folks, it could save you some hassle if you just move on and only focus on the things that are required there. Once you are in, the application does save your progress. So you don't necessarily have to do it in one sitting. But I will say, once you hit the submit button and you get an email confirmation, or I should say, definitely you get a confirmation number. I can't remember if it just pops up on the screen. I do believe the contact person does get an email. You'll get a unique ID number that you can use to reference if you have to call us and you have some questions, or maybe you forgot to add something and you want to add it to your file. You'll have to work through us to make those updates after it's submitted. But like I said, it'll save your progress. You could chip away at it, continually upload things or delete things, but if something gets over there by mistake, before that's all submitted. So there's some flexibility there. As I mentioned, May 31st seems like it's far away. It really will be here before we know it. So I think the sooner, if you are interested in applying, kind of get in, familiarize yourself with the application itself. And if you were paying attention to that supplemental information and referencing the guidelines, some of that information is going to be stuff that you maybe want to start working into your schedule so that you can have them readily available to upload once you're devoting the time to actually sit at your computer and kind of type through this. We do have a resource, and I know, Pecola, we were talking about, a specific, if there were any specific details of a walkthrough for our electronic single application. And we do have this resource that is available for anybody to take advantage of. And I will wrap up here shortly so we can make sure that we have some additional time for questions. But I did want to share this. Honestly, if I clicked here, this could be in and of itself. Oh, well, we might have to wait here a minute, but this could be in and of itself an entire presentation. But I really do just want to kind of let you know, it's another slideshow. This was put together by our wonderful customer service team, and it literally is a step-by-step, and to avoid making you dizzy. I mean, I know we had kind of gone through some of these, but it really does start all the way at step one. How do I even register for an account? Who do I talk to? All the way to those user settings I briefly mentioned that could be helpful to put in place. Again, not required, but could be helpful. And then it just kind of continues for several slides here. So I did just want to make folks aware that this exists, because I do think it's important to, oh, here I lost my, there we go. I do think it's an important resource that folks should be aware of. And you can kind of take your time, go through that. One thing I will say is if you have any questions, the best piece of advice I could give you is to call us. We really want to help you. We don't want you to struggle. We don't want to see you panic. We don't, want anybody to have a meltdown. So please, 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 if you are in the thick of things, particularly if you have a program related question, you can reach me directly here. I know our guidelines have a general resource account. Skip all that. We now know each other. I encourage folks to call me, to reach out to me directly. That's my direct line. You can reach me via email. We can always set up a chat, a time to chat, a time to call, and schedule that and set that time aside. Our customer service is available for technical support. So if you're reviewing the information in that slide material I just showed you, the walkthrough of the application, they're great at fielding phone calls. That is their job, to provide customer service, but they know the ins and outs of the technical side of the application. So if you get stuck, please just give them a call. They're more than happy to help out. So that's all I have for today. If there are any questions, I did want to allow some additional time here to take us up to 11:30. If there's anything else I could help answer.
Yes, we had a question in the chat. I'm trying to open it up now.
Okay.
So Michelle had a question about the application procedures. So she was wondering, I think this referred to the whole application process, or at least exhibit one. Michelle, you could clarify if needed. So she wanted to know if it should go through building one, should list HVAC, roof, windows, and then like building two, we're gonna do plumbing, HVAC, electrical. Or if the application should be application one is doing HVAC of all buildings. And then application two is doing roofing for all applicable buildings.
Ah, I see. So in this case, it sounds like you have multiple buildings in need of the same improvements. My thought is to ask how you would be bidding out this project. Like what would make sense to you if you were actually going to bid and wanting to implement. So here are a couple of things that I would think about. I think that could go either way. Like if you have two buildings and you're literally looking at the same laundry list of things, do you apply, one application is all roofing, one application is all HVAC for both buildings? It depends on how many of those lines, because remember, you'll have that $100 application fee. So if you're talking about 3 or 4 different activities, that could add up quickly. But if you're only talking about 2 buildings, I would say the easiest thing is to just, do 2 applications, and then each application focuses on one building and the laundry list of items that you want to accomplish. I'm not sure if I answered that. Does that make sense? That's the
Yeah.
first time I think I've been posed in that way, like a scenario where you may have multiple buildings that are just in need of the same types of work.
Yes, Michelle said yes, thank you. So do we have any other questions? Give them a second to type their questions. Let's see, Michelle asked, do you have a date for substantial completion of the project?
Great question. So if we are approved, we move forward, we generate our contract documents, and in those contract documents, we identify the eligible activity period. These are the dates, the start date and end date that would say, this is when your job, then this is when your proposal, this is when your work is supposed to happen. Folks who are approved in this funding round, I imagine we will set an expiration date of June 30th, 2027. We typically go 3 fiscal years out from the year that we're making the awards. So that June 30th, 2027 date would be what we refer to as the expiration date of the funding contract, which equates to you have up until and through that day to incur costs that you were hoping to make eligible under the program.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And we have another question from Dolores. How will the applications be prioritized?
So we do not know that right now. We are working through a funding rubric conversation. The law does mention that we have to create a rubric that allows for some sort of competitive evaluation. While we have the criteria that we need to focus on, what we don't have is the conversation piece where we know where certain criteria are going to be weighted. So we are working through that, and more will be coming forth there. I believe when we do get that information, there may be some publicized pieces of this program coming through so that folks know what that information looks like.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? We'll give them a second to do that. But yeah, thank you, Christie, so much for sharing this grant with us. I'm really hoping that some of these schools here today will apply for this.
Yeah, and just as a side note, while I'm here, I will plug the Department of Education also has a funding stream available. They were announced at the same time, so they're focused on Act 33, which was a $75 million injection towards um, environmental repairs.
Yes.
So for anybody focused on environmental remediation, it may also be worth looking into that. Again, any questions, feel free to reach out to either program manager. I do just want to, acknowledge, I do think at the onset there was some confusion. We kind of made the announcement at the same time out of Governor Shapiro's office. They're two totally different amounts and funding pots that are not tied together at all. And we do have a little bit of overlap. So while PDE is focused on strictly that environmental repairs, those are technically eligible under our program as well. And then along with that overlap, I believe we'll have a little bit of an overlap in the application window too. So please feel free to reach out and ask questions should you have anything. We'd really like to tackle anything up front if we can.
Thank you, Christy. We do have one more question from Mike. He wanted to
Okay.
know, will the grant funding be a reimbursement or will the district only be responsible for the match out of pocket?
So the funding is processed as a reimbursement. What that means is we have to receive evidence of costs incurred prior to release of any funding. Now, beyond that, I also would like to let folks know, say you're awarded a $1 million grant, that doesn't mean you have to incur the full $1 million before you can tap into the funding. So throughout the life of that funding contract and the life of the project, as it's moving forward and things are getting done, let's say during the first month of project activity, the vendor bills you for $20,000 worth of work. You can go ahead and submit that paperwork into us. We will provide a form to complete and some instructions on how and where, how to complete it, where to send it for processing. But it will be a reimbursement. So nothing will be coming out in front of those costs or that project beginning. So that's a great question. So something, again, I think to be prepared, as you're thinking about applying here.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for answering that. Just so everybody knows, I put a form in the chat box. If you all could fill it out, that would be really helpful. And Christy also mentioned the Pennsylvania Department of Education's grant. We will also, Women for Healthy Environment will also be holding a webinar with their program officer on April 23rd. I'll be sending out emails about that, so you'll have the opportunity to learn more about that grant as well. Just make sure no other questions before we say bye, but I hope everybody has a great day. Michelle says thank you. It's been really helpful. So thank you again, Christy. We really appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. I'm glad to be here. And like I said, I really truly invite any follow-up questions, phone number or email. Either one works great for me. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you. Have a nice day, everybody.